I'm Kelly Andrews from the Center for High Impact Philanthropy at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice. Today, we will hear an introduction from Cecilia Conrad, CEO of Lever for Change and a managing director of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. From there, we'll hear from Jeff Ubois, who is the Vice President and Knowledge Management of Lever for Change, who will talk about the Bold Solutions Network and how this project came to be. Next up is Rosqueta, who's the founding executive director of the Center for High Impact Philanthropy, who will talk about the 5 elements of our Choosing Change rubric and then moderate a panel of leaders from nonprofit organizations that exemplify these elements. Our panelists are Angie Murimirwa, executive director, Africa for CAMFED International, Maanda and Ngoitiko, who is the founder and executive director of the Pastoral Women's Council, Sonya Passi, who is founder and CEO of FreeFrom, and Sato, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Ada Developers Academy. We'll then open up the webinar for audience questions. So please enter your questions in chat or using the Q&A function on Zoom. And now here is Cecilia.
Good day. I am Cecilia Conrad, CEO of Lever for Change. We are a 3.5-year-old nonprofit affiliate of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. We help donors find and fund solutions to critical needs, such as a reduction in CO2 emissions, a durable future for refugees, a stronger democracy, and so on. We do this through customized challenges and by matchmaking donors with submissions to those challenges through a secondary market, our Bold Solutions Network. One motivation for launching Lever for Change was to remove some of the barriers that lead to inequity in philanthropy. We hoped to broaden access to funding by shifting away from an invitation-only model to an open call to opportunities. We work to the nonprofits that are engaged in the work by encouraging our donor partners to define their goals broadly and allow organizations to propose their own solutions to accomplish those goals. We have tried to reduce the burden of what can be a laborious application process by having transparent criteria, transparent information about rules, and by creating self-assessment and self-help tools to aid along the process. All of these have been in service of trying to create a more equitable landscape. But after 11 challenges, we know that there is still more to do to address invisible obstacles that impede a focus on equity and funding decisions. One area for scrutiny is the criteria and rubric that we ask our panels of independent evaluators to use when they score proposals. Hence, we are very excited about this partnership with the Center for High Impact Philanthropy to develop the toolkit, Choosing Change, how to assess grant proposals for their potential to address structural inequality. In addition, we have a second reason for this partnership with CHIP, which, by the way, is our second partnership with CHIP. We also collaborated with them when MacArthur had its first 100 and change. And that reason is that Lever for Change is committed to sharing our data for the benefit of philanthropists and for philanthropy writ large. We share information about the creative projects that we have pre-vetted and the teams proposing them that have been submitted to our challenges. We share it with donors so that the donor can apply his or her own criteria to find the best fit. And we have evidence that this model is working to help move more philanthropic capital for social change. In our 3 years, we have influenced over $950 million in philanthropic grants, and over half of those dollars have been awarded through our post-challenge matchmaking work. This afternoon, or this morning, or this evening, depending on where you are, you will hear from 4 members of our Bold Solutions Network on the panel today. But first, I'd like to introduce my colleague at Lever for Change, Jeff Ubois, who will say more about this partnership. Jeff?
Hi, my name is Jeff Ubois. I'm the Vice President of Knowledge Management at Lever for Change, And I've been working with CHIP to develop this project and the one before it for several years. I'm excited about it for three reasons here. First, I think that developing and improving the criteria used to evaluate applications and to solicit them from the field are at the heart of good philanthropic practice, and CHIP has taken a real step forward on behalf of everyone with this project. Second, it highlights excellent work by excellent organizations in the Bold Solutions Network. These are organizations that have done very well in Lever for Change's open calls and connects them into a new donor community. Third, this is a great cross-check for Lever for Change on how well we're sourcing projects and selecting proposals that address critical needs in the world. Just a couple more points of background. So Cecilia referenced the Bold Solutions Network. This is an online searchable collection of summaries of highly rated, rigorously evaluated proposals or bold solutions that emerge from competitions managed by Lever for Change. We launched the Bold Solutions Network as a component of our mission to accelerate social change and help philanthropists overcome challenges that help them from achieving their ambitions. Research shows that while many philanthropists aspire to make big bets for social change, they often struggle to find, evaluate, and fund high-impact philanthropic opportunities, in part because they don't have the dedicated staff that these efforts required. A second point around the criteria is that in program areas in foundations and large foundations evolve typically through two things. One is a series of binary decisions regarding individual grant applications, yes or no, and through the development of selection criteria that are used to seek and select new awards. As a result, these criteria come to define the identity of a foundation, a program, or a donor. And at Lever for Change, we're trying to do things a little bit differently. For each of our challenges, we carefully develop criteria that external independent judges can apply to the proposals they receive. Developing criteria is one of the hardest things we do, and it raises a lot of difficult questions. For instance, what differentiates a proposal that is likely to be useful and effective from a proposal that is not? Which criteria are most likely to be understood and applied consistently by judges with different backgrounds? How strictly or loosely do we define the criteria or ideas, or account for what we don't know? One thing we have found is that with all the sets of selection criteria we have developed, and we expect to see with this one too, is that the understanding of them improves with use, especially when they're applied to many proposals concurrently. Often, our donor partners find that the process of considering grant applications sharpens the criteria they have developed. And that's why we're always so interested in new efforts to develop criteria that can help us and other funders identify the best proposals for any given purpose. CHIP brings a unique expertise in bridging the deep academic work done on campus with donor practice. And the focus on structural inequality in this project with Lever for Change is driven by a sense that treating structural inequality allows philanthropy to address the underlying causes for a wide variety of social problems. These criteria are more considered and credible than most that I've seen, and they were developed based on a deep dive into prior academic and philanthropic work, and then applied to proposals drawn from our Bold Solutions Network and applied by actual donors. So we got a nice cycle of looking at the criteria, looking at the proposals, and then looking at both again. So with that, I'll pass it back to Kelly and Kat, and look forward to this discussion.
Cecilia, Jeff, this is Kat Rosqueta. I'm founding executive director for the Center for High Impact Philanthropy. Thank you both for your welcome remarks and the context you provided on what has now been a many years partnership to try to advance philanthropic practice so that individual donors and professional grant makers alike can make a bigger difference with the philanthropic resources they have. That is at the heart of the Center for High Impact Philanthropy's mission. And as Jeff said, while we are based here at the University of Pennsylvania, we're at the School of Social Policy and Practice. We have tremendous respect for the academic work that some of our colleagues pursue. We exist at what I would describe as the very applied edge of what universities produce. And we have two mandates, and none of them are that our team's work is going to be cited in an academic journal. Our two mandates are, our work has to be informed by the best available evidence, And we know some of the best evidence for creating social change is the lived experience of those who are working at the front lines or who are participating in some of the programs that some of the great leaders you're going to hear from are working on. Informed by the best available evidence and actionable in the real world. So I'm going to start by presenting just at a very high level the framework on reducing structural inequality that Jeff alluded to. And in particular, I'm going to talk about the 5 different dimensions that we identified. As Jeff said, we not only reviewed all the relevant academic research, equally important, we looked at existing frameworks and we vetted our early drafts of this with nonprofit leaders, grant makers, and individual donors. For us, that's our form of peer review to make sure this truly is useful and actionable in the real world. So the 5 dimensions for reducing structural inequality. I'll let my colleagues advance to the next slide. The first is inclusion, right? Structural inequality both results from and leads to the exclusion of the interests and perspectives of members of our communities, broadly speaking. And so what we found is, although there are many frameworks and rubrics for assessing the strength of a grant proposal, we did not see ones that explicitly called out the degree to which a grant proposal is including the voices and perspectives of those the proposal is intended to help. And that means from every aspect of the work, including setting the priorities of the organization's efforts, all the way to the ways in which success is measured. So that is one dimension that is part of this framework, is assessing for inclusion. Now, this is closely related to the next element, which is durability of power. If you include those perspectives, but the individuals and the communities who have those perspectives do not gain any power or any increased agency in determining what happens, well, then you're not going to make progress. And so that was another dimension that, frankly, these first 2 are ones that we did not see explicitly in most of the frameworks, and frankly, in any of the frameworks that we looked at. So durability of power refers to how well the solution ensures that any gains in power created as a result of this work persist. The next dimension, strength of evidence. So the case that the proposal has for its potential success. Now, almost every grant maker, donor who cares about impact is looking at the strength of evidence. But one of the things to remember is evidence looks very different for a brand new organization compared to one that's been in existence for many, many years and has been incredibly well resourced. It looks different when it is part of an existing institution versus a truly grassroots, decentralized type of effort. And so part of what we tried to emphasize with the strength of evidence is the need to right size the evidence based on the work that's being proposed, the developmental stage of the group that's proposing it, and the issues that they're trying to tackle, right? Evidence for a vaccine, for example, is very different from the kind of evidence that you might be looking at to change national legislation. But understanding what's the right evidence for what you're looking at is a way to understand the potential of success for the proposal. The next is organizational capacity. Again, this is one that almost every organization or every proposal and funder tries to address. And it gets to the group's ability to implement, measure, and manage its intended results. What can often happen, though, is if you're being more inclusive, if you are trying to ensure that a community or a set of individuals who didn't have power now have power, then remember, it is unlikely that they will have the same kinds of capacity, organizational capacity, that you have traditionally looked at. So again, our rubric helps to assess what does organizational capacity, what does good organizational capacity mean for the kind of group that is proposing this solution. And then finally, the last is systems level impact. This refers to how well the proposal solution addresses the systemic barriers to advancing structural change. Not every proposal is looking to change systems, but it's existing systems that are what support the structural inequality. So it's very difficult to imagine a world where structural inequality is dismantled when you haven't changed the underlying systems that support the status quo. Now, one of the things that we thought of when we did this is that structural inequality and an opportunity to address structural inequality can exist in lots of different geographies, working with lots of different communities, and in lots of different cause areas. In fact, I would argue that no matter what cause area, geography, community that you as an individual donor or professional grant maker care about, if you have an eye to structural inequality, you will actually make progress faster and a more sustained way. And one of the benefits that we have of the partnership with Cecilia and Jeff and the whole Lever for Change and their network is access to the amazing work of some of the folks who truly are at the front lines of addressing structural inequality. Kelly mentioned this at the beginning, but in a moment, I'm going to welcome into the Zoom room Angie Murimirwa, the Executive Director of Africa for CAMFED International, Maanda, the Founder and Executive Director for the Pastoral Women's Council, Sonya, Founder and CEO of FreeFrom, and Lauren, Chief Executive Officer of Ada Developers Academy. So welcome, everybody. It's great to see you. It is probably for anybody who thinks about dismantling structural inequality and where power lies now and where power needs to go, may not be surprised that I'm staring at a room full of women leaders. So I want to make sure everybody in our audience understands the great work that you're doing. So just by way of introductory comments, if you can share what you're focused on, and I'll start with Angie and CAMFED's work. Angie, please.
Thanks so much, Kate. My name is Angeline Ramirez. I'm the Executive Director for CAMFED, the Campaign for Female Education. CAMFED was founded in 1993 in response to the scale of girls' exclusion from education and in recognition of the transformative benefits that accrue when the right to education is secured, not for some, but for all girls. At CAMFED, we support marginalized girls to learn, to thrive, and lead change through catalyzing the power of the most vulnerable girls and young women to create the future they imagine. These girls and young women are our beneficiaries. We prefer and refer to them as our clients, individuals to whom we owe our very existence. Young women leaders who have completed secondary school through CAMFED's program are united under a Pan-African network called the CAMFED Association, now close to 210,000 members strong. This largest and fastest growing peer network of educated young women drive CAMFED's model in Africa. Each of the members of the CAMFED Association is committed to investing in their future, investing their time, their financial and social resources as well in supporting of other vulnerable children. I just want to say that CAMFED's leadership and teams in Africa are largely now made up of former clients, beneficiaries, and the women we serve. So 1 in 3 of CAMFED staff globally are CAMFED Association members. This proportion goes as high as 54% in Zimbabwe, where our work started. Personally, I'm one of the very first young women CAMFED supported through school in Zimbabwe. and one of the founding members of the CAMFED Association. Today, I co-lead CAMFED as its executive director, uniquely positioned to bring the expertise of young women once excluded from education to inform policy. You see, at CAMFED, we take inclusivity to a whole new level. CAMFED is led by those who have experienced the problem, and it is them that are at the forefront of the solutions. Thanks, Kat. Back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Angie. I'm going to start with just, you get a little glimmer of the great work and how all of these organizations reflect those 5 dimensions that I just described, and then we'll dive into a conversation. Maanda, please introduce yourself and the great work that you're doing.
My name is Maanda Ngoitiko. I am the director and the founder of Pastoral Women's Council. And PwC was started in 1997 by a group of 10 women, including myself. These 10 women shared the value of solidarity and injustice that we experienced in our life in Maasai community, which is very, very patriotic. We were determined to create a new generation of Maasai women who are able to stand for the right of individuals and especially the right of Maasai girls. During that particular time, you hardly see any Maasai person professional or anyone who working in the community. So we felt like we are very much marginalized within the community and outside the community. And Pastoral Women's Council is actually working with the pastoralist community, and pastoralists are the livelihood keeper who are practicing nomadic lifestyle. And land and natural resources with people is actually the core value of Maasai culture. You cannot distinguish Maasai culture with land-based resources. And because of this land, our natural resources are abandoned in our areas. We have been faced by a high level marginalization or alienation of land, and because the government do not necessarily recognize pastoralism as a way of life, and therefore the land is seen as idle. And PwC particularly has been working with Maasai women. We are actually a membership organization. We started with 20 women, and today we have a membership of 13,000 women in northern Tanzania. We have been working very closely by building movement of the community to understand their rights, to understand their constitutional rights, to understand the land rights. And as a result of PwC as a movement building organization, we have been able to secure, working with other pastoralist organizations at the national level and different ministries, we have been able to secure over 2 million hectares of grazing land in northern Tanzania. And this is actually the work of Pastoral Women's Council in a nutshell. We are also working with women groups. Our members are working to strive economic empowerment. And this has been a big platform. Economic empowerment has been a big platform for these women all to meet together and discuss practical issues and issues that are affecting them directly. So we are also working with young women to educate them, to provide securing community curriculum, which is going beyond their classroom. It's actually talking about what do we need as a woman? What do we need as a, what rights are we lacking? What social norms that are deeply affecting these women? What do we want to see change? What about the marriage? What about education? What about the dignity as a Maasai woman, as a woman that is facing double marginalization? So this is actually the core. The right is actually underpinning the entire work of Pastoral Women's Council. I will definitely talk later on about durability of power and what specifically are we doing about this.
Yeah. So Maanda, what's great about the way you describe your work, it touches on so many different issue areas that people care about, right? You're talking about economic empowerment. You're talking about legal rights. You're talking about responsible resource management, and you're talking about elevating a community that often is not seen as in a leadership role to actually view them as a source of potential solutions. So thank you for sort of giving us so much that we can dig into in a moment. Sonia, please tell us about your work.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sonia. I'm the founder and CEO of FreeFrom. We are a national organization here in the United States, based in Los Angeles. We're a team of 18 survivors, queer, trans, people of color, really representing the communities that we come from. So 1 in 4 women and 1 in 2 trans folks in the US will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And the number 1 obstacle to safety for survivors is financial insecurity. And this is for 2 reasons. The first is it is incredibly expensive to experience intimate partner violence. The CDC estimates that intimate partner violence will cost a female survivor an average of $104,000. And on top of this, 99% of survivors experience economic abuse as part of the harm. And that can look like anything from not being allowed to work to having your paycheck taken, having loans and credit cards in your name that you don't know about, and all of the above. And when we're talking about numbers like this, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 2 trans folks, 99% of folks experiencing economic abuse, the number 1 obstacle being financial insecurity. What we're really talking about is a systemic economic issue. This is a problem with economic causes and economic consequences. And yet the way that our society is currently addressing the issue is short-term relief at a moment of acute crisis. If you leave a harmful situation, you will be supported with temporary shelter, a temporary restraining order, and access to public benefits. However, what we know is that this is a generational problem. What we know is that most people cannot afford to leave even if they want to. And so everything that FreeFrom does is at this intersection of intimate partner violence and financial security, and trying to shift the way that our society responds to this problem so that we are providing support long before a moment of acute crisis and long after. And we do a lot of things. We are training organizations working in the movement to end intimate partner violence on how to do economic support services for their clients, everything from how do you help someone pull a credit report and check for fraud, and what do you do at that point? How do you support someone in, taking the best skills that they've got and getting a job? To our cash assistance program, we run a national cash assistance program for survivors. We have been able to get grants to 7,200 survivors in the US since the beginning of COVID. We have a national peer-to-peer financial support network for survivors, where survivors are meeting with other survivors and in community and building on their own wisdom and resources, supporting each other in building financial security. We have an online tool, our compensation compass, where we have basically mapped out in very plain language how you can use different legal systems to seek compensation in your state. That tool has been used by more than 15,000 survivors at this point. We have a map and scorecard that has cataloged the laws in every single state in the US, addressed how survivor friendly or not they are. That tool has had over 10,000 users since it launched last May, and there are 15 states right now that are pursuing legislation based on the recommendations of that tool. And then we have our systems change work, which is really, if we're talking about a systemic problem, if we're talking about our entire society being responsible for this issue, then our entire society needs to take responsibility for this issue. And that means our banks, our employers, our federal, city, state, local governments, our insurance companies, our education system. And so we have a number of efforts working with employers, working with financial institutions, working with the federal government right now to do their part and to remove the structural obstacles that exist to survivors being able to be financially secure.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think after I give Lauren a chance to describe her work, I would love to learn more about the policy and advocacy and legal changes that I know many of you are working towards, because that is one way to make the shifts in power more durable, right, and more explicit. But before we go there, I'm sorry, I'm getting very eager to dive in. Lauren, please share more about Ada Developers Academy.
No, I also want to dive in. All of the connective tissues are firing. There's so much incredible power in this room. I want to have follow-up conversations with everybody else here. But I will introduce Ada and myself. My name's Lauren Sato. I am the CEO at Ada Developers Academy. We are a software development or coding bootcamp for women and gender expansive people in the US. We primarily serve women and gender expansive people from the Black, Latina, Indigenous American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, LGBTQIA+, and low-income communities. Ada exists to solve two primary social or commercial problems in our country. The first is women in work, and that was a problem prior to COVID. We have hit an absolute cliff as a result of COVID. There are still 2 million women in this country who left the workforce during this pandemic who have not returned. That is deeply problematic for them, for their families, and for our economy. Ada exists to get them into careers that are sustainable and that can provide for themselves and their family, create that economic agency that everybody here has been talking about, and to leverage the wealth of the tech industry in order to do that. The other problem that we're solving is the dramatic talent gap in the tech industry and the dramatic underrepresentation of women and gender expansive folks in that industry, which really is the wealth engine of our time. So 25% of coders today are women, only 4% are women of color. Our primary pathway into that field is our computer science degree programs. Only 19% of those folks are women. So if you just do the math, our primary pathway is driving down our representation in the industry. There's no way for us to achieve economic equity if we don't find alternative pathways. And so that's why Ada exists, is to create an alternative pathway that has a faster production cycle. It's not 4 years to this career, it's 1 year to this career. And really, those are the two things that we talk about in our marketing, those two problems. But ultimately, our goal is to shift who holds wealth and power in this country. We have to better distribute wealth and power in this country. Right now, we have one pole in this tent, and we are so vulnerable because of this one pole. Our goal at Ada is to create a tent with 10 poles that is resilient and that allows for more people to come into the tent. We know that when we invest in women and when women have economic agency, we see better educational outcomes, we see better health outcomes, we see stronger communities and resilient economies as a result. And so that's ultimately why Ada exists. And we've been able to do that on a relatively small scale in Seattle since about 2013. What we've realized over the last several years is that we have an imperative to expand that work. And it's been such a privilege to get to know Lever for Change as a part of this process, where we are thinking more deeply about how we can reach more folks more quickly and really scale this really important work. So over the past year, we've built a plan to expand nationally, to be not in 1 city, but 5 cities, to also have a digital program, to serve not 48 students every 6 months, but 1,000. And when we go back to those numbers about folks graduating from computer science degrees, that equates to about 4,000 women of color graduating from computer science degrees each year. Our goal at the end of this 5-year period is to be doubling that. And we know that we're all going to benefit as a result of that. And that our tech's going to be better as well, because technology that's built for the full range of humanity, but isn't built by the full range of humanity, is missing the mark. 85% of consumer decisions are made by women, but only 25% of us are at the software development table. Just on a very commercial level, those tech companies are missing opportunities to resonate with their consumers. So our goal is not only to really shift who holds wealth and power in this country, but to engage the market in solving that problem. So Ada is totally free to our students. There's no income sharing agreement on the back end. We're totally free, and we provide the support services that we know women need in order to successfully navigate a career transition. So free laptops, childcare, a living expense stipend. They have to put food on the table while they're going through this intensive program. All of those things, and our corporate partners are the ones who are footing the bill. because it's good for them. And so when we talk about sustainable, scalable systems change, I think engaging the market is a really critical part of this conversation, because I have a deep belief that ADA will be successful because it is tied to outcomes that everybody is invested in. So I will stop there. I'm super excited to dive in more in this conversation. And Sonia, I would love to get folks from your program into our program and get them that wealth that is longitudinal. We actually have one ADA alum who ended up as a CTO of Seattle Against Slavery, building technology to stop human trafficking. So much connectivity here. Really excited for the conversation. Kat, I will hand it back to you.
Okay, fantastic. I'm actually going to build off on your last comment. So I get the honor and pleasure of launching this conversation, but we have plenty of people on this webinar who bring their own expertise and I suspect their own questions. So I'm going to encourage people. We already see some of them coming in. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a Q&A function. I'm going to keep an eye on that. And if it makes sense in the flow of the conversation to bring in your question, I will. But I will also leave some time at the end of this to address any questions that have come in that we haven't yet had a chance to tackle. But before we do that, I want to pick up on some things that Lauren said about this notion that we are missing opportunities, that we are relying only on one tent pole when there could be 10, right? That could make for a more vibrant, more resilient society for all of us, and the partnerships that are required in order to make that happen. So I'll start with a question to Maanda, but I also invite everybody else to comment. Maanda, you described your organization is led by Maasai women. However, you talked about how the issues that you are working on, like responsible resource management, that is relevant to everybody and a concern globally. So could you talk a little bit more about how other constituencies, in addition to the Maasai women who are emerging as leaders, how they are involved in your work?
Yeah, it's very true that Pastoral Women's Council focus when we started was only exclusively working with Maasai women. But the more we worked really hard and learned, we came to realize that our work, especially when you talk about natural resource management, you are talking about who is losing what and who is gaining what. You are talking about political powers. You are talking about big bosses who make decisions somewhere. So we work very, very closely, starting from, for example, how we obtain the grazing land certificate and title deeds. We work with the village council, which are local leaders, including women and men, first to make sure that they understand the land law. What is the land law stipulate about the community rights? What is the Constitution of Tanzania says about the local community rights to manage natural resources and actually access ownership and benefiting from it. So we make sure that our constituencies, the community, truly understand the implications and ownership of community natural resources in their own village. And then we move there, we go to the district level, which is now, is not only Maasai community, is a much bigger platform of the entire district leaders who make the decision. So we develop our bylaws, we develop the land use plan on how we use this land. And we advocate at the district level to make sure that they approve our plans. For example, one of the plans, it's really like the plans are talking about grazing rights. They are talking about mobility. They are talking about protection of water sources. They are talking about how the Maasai community are using the land communally. So communally, collectively. So we advocate those plans at the district council. And when the plans are approved, we go all the way to the regional level. Now we go to the Ministry of Lands, to the bosses who came and do the maps, who do the title deeds. We advocate, we meet them, we talk to them. Those are non-Maasai completely, but they are actually officials, the government officials. We have to talk to them. It can take a year, it can take 2 years, even without them approving it. So we truly advocate with the community, but we will be having the community on our back, advocating and talking And we have this approved map. And when we have this approved at the regional level with all these surveyors, land surveyors, we now go to the Minister of Land in Dodoma, in the capital city. This is now where we meet the member of parliament who are not necessarily the Maasai. For example, in Tanzania, there are 350 and there are only 5 Maasai. So you can imagine, they have their own parliamentary different committees, the Committee on Land and Natural Resources. So we have to go and meet them with all the description, with all our maps. We talk to them, we persuade them, we discuss with them. They go and visit. And when they agree, they will now stamp. And the minister now gazette this land belong to the community. And actually, as a result of that, when the government now, because in Tanzania, the land ownership is very, very complicated because the president had the custodian of the entire land in Tanzania. That means the president has the power to actually allocate the village land that belongs to the community to another category, let's say wildlife sanctuary or wildlife conservancy. So the president has the say, actually, and they have the power to transform the community land to give it to any investor for hunting. For example, we currently have like 3 litigation in the court against one of the very big, powerful companies. So this is how we work. So we work with agro-pastoralists who are not necessarily the Maasai. We work with decision makers and lawmakers and policy makers. We work with community growing organizations. For example, right now we are working with 7 CBOs, community-led organizations who are not necessarily belong to the Maasai community, because we want to replicate our impact. But more importantly, we want them to learn our methodology of working. We also work with national organizations, national NGOs. For example, currently we are going through 2 big issues of a likely eviction in Tanzania, in our areas where I come from. And we have been able to work very, very closely with other stakeholders, the government, the media. For example, we have a big, vast media campaign with 3 million people signed worldwide to tell the president to stop the Maasai eviction because they are the guardian of their environment, and we have been protecting this land for years. So we have been using also women rights leadership forums, for example, in the Maasai community, to stand strongly opposing all these outside pressures. And as a result, other organizations who are not necessarily the Maasai have been coming to learn from us. For example, as I talk today, we have a group of
Maanda, I want to respectfully interrupt, partly because I feel like you have just teed up so many great issues that I want to make sure people can see how this is relevant to literally everybody on this call. So I'm just going to pick 2 of them that you described. You laid out a whole network of constituencies, right? Up to the president, right? For others on this call, can you give us a sense of who you are engaging in the areas that you're working in to create the kind of durable change that Maanda just described, right? She's talking about change in who believes this is an issue that's relevant to them. She talked about change in legal rights, land rights, right? She talked about working with the media. So I'm going to sort of open it up, and maybe it might be good to bring your perspective in, Angie, partly because my sense is among the organizations here, CAMFED is among the most established. So it might be a good example to talk about all those great issues that Maanda teed up, but particularly stakeholder engagement and how that links up to durable change that is reflected in things like legislation.
Sure, thanks so much, Kate, for that. And it was just fascinating listening to Maanda there. And, you know, I could actually just think that, you know, she's talking about some of the work that we do already. That's how relevant this is, particularly when we talk about interfacing with power as it stands now. And I just want to say that as an organization, as CAMFED, we design and run to guarantee durability of gains attained. Because I think to borrow Lauren's word earlier, this is about shifts in who holds power. And it's not enough to have a fly-by-night intervention where you say, oh, it's working today. How do you guarantee the gains that you have gained? And I like what Maanda is talking about, because she's talking about land ownership, because that's one means of production that we need to talk about. For us as an organization, we invest in girls' education, because we recognize that a girl excluded from education is a woman excluded from leadership later on. It's like a woman is handicapped and disadvantaged from the word go because she's been excluded from education. So we take that quite seriously as an organization. So I just want to walk you through how we, for us, try and guarantee durability of gains made and durability of shift in power. At the center and at the core of our culture as an organization is our founding principle of accounting to the girl, accountability to the girl. In Maanda's case, this would be accountability to the Maasai woman who they are seeking to support. For us, it's accountability to the marginalized girl who is excluded from education. For us, and this plays in everything from management to governance in every aspect of our work. The question that we constantly ask ourselves is, how is this accounting to the girl that is most disadvantaged? How do we make this system, this strategy, this intervention serve this girl in this season, in this time? I like some references made earlier by Lauren around speed and timing of the changes that we need. So at the core of our work is the young woman that we support. Is their experience and leadership that is crucial to defining durability of changes made. So I spoke earlier on about me being a co-executive of CAMFED. I also just want to underscore that I'm among 210,000 other young women leaders in the association across 5 countries. Each of these young women leaders are working tirelessly to make this world a better place in their niche. Take, for example, their work in meeting financial costs for education for those excluded from education. So on average, every young woman member of the CAMFED Association supports from their own personal coffers, from their own personal resources, another 3 girls through school. This is critical, and I'll come back to it, just quickly in a moment. To the point that our friend Nick Christoph, who has written about this in the New York Times, calls this a perpetual motion machine. Because these CAMFED Association leaders are igniting the multiplier effect. So the impact of one girl who has been kept through school continues to give, as she supports 3 and the 3 supports 3 and the 3 supports 3. So there is a multiplier over and over again. So in a way, we are continually generating a next generation of leaders. We're ensuring that women traditionally excluded from power, from participation in politics, have got a say and are participating by first and foremost, protecting their right to education. I'll just quickly move to the issue around stakeholder engagement. We have got a very decentralized community-led infrastructure. And Sonia referred to this earlier on as rallying an entire society to take responsibility to join hands to solve the challenge at hand. Because for us, it's not just about putting this burden of transforming this community on the young woman who's been traditionally marginalized before. It's actually putting their reality and the experience on the decision-making table to make sure that that problem is acknowledged, that there are people from this constituency that are speaking to this issue, and of course that there are solutions that are tailor-made and responsive to the reality of where they're coming from. I'll just say, finally, our durability is also supported by organizational agility, which allows us to uncover new ways to support the learning of girls and identify the support and resources those at the forefront of our solution need in order to drive change. So in short, we design and organize and deliver for durability of power, for the gains made to be sustained to posterity. Back to you, Ken.
Thanks. Well, I don't know if you could see, but when you said, Angie, the multiplier effect of when you include girls, and that leads to a next generation of leaders. You got very strong nods from Sonia and Lauren, who are the other 2 people I could see clearly on my screen. So I just want to invite either one of you, Sonia and Lauren, to sort of build off of what Angie just said and maybe explain those strong nods and how it's relevant to your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Maanda and Angeline. It's been fascinating learning about your work. And to what Angeline said about accountability and who we are accountable to. Not only are we accountable to survivors, but every single thing that FreeFrom does, every idea that we espouse comes from survivors. At the beginning of COVID, we started a cash assistance program, and the application was very simple. Do you identify as a survivor? What is the safest way to get money to you? What is the safest way to contact you? We were very clear at that point, you don't have to do anything else to get money. We have these other questions. If you have a minute, if you're interested, if you'd like to share your experience, we would love to hear from you. And almost every single person answered all of the questions. And, you know, for starters, I think it says something about giving people the option to be in a reciprocal relationship. I think it says something about actually paying people for their time and it not feeling extractive to gather information about the needs and experiences of the people that we are serving. But what we have amassed at this point is data from 7,200 survivors on exactly what they want, exactly what they need. And so when we're going forward and saying, this is what FreeFrom is doing, or this is what you as employers should do, or this is what you as the federal government should do, it's 7,200 survivors saying that. It's not even FreeFrom. And that is so powerful and so difficult to ignore. We've had reports that have been cited by the Biden-Harris administration. We've had reports that are sitting on the Attorney General's desk, apparently. And this kind of thing, outside of, you know, 3 years of rigorous academic research, this is just us gathering information, analyzing it, and putting a report together, and how impactful that can be. And so I think a lot of the barriers that we perceive there to be to just hearing directly from and addressing directly the needs of people, you know, well, do we have a control group? Well, it will take 3 years. Well, we'll need to attach an academic institution. Actually, I think we've conned ourselves into how complicated it can be to just listen to people and implement strategies that are driven directly by those needs. And of course, in doing so, making sure that we are hearing from as diverse a sample of survivors as we can, and also not making the mistake of only putting forward one approach, and really trying to understand that our solutions have to be as nuanced and diverse as the people experiencing the problem and as the experiences of the people who are experiencing the problem. I want to stop talking because I want Lauren to get to share more.
Yeah, thank you. Lauren?
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I'll try to be quick as well. We have a universe of things to talk about here. I mean, yeah, I was wanting to shout from the rooftops as Angeline was talking. 50% of our donors are alums. 50% of our volunteers who are actively tutoring and mentoring our current students are alums. We see it proven over and over and over again. When you invest in one woman, you're actually investing in generations of women. On top of that, they're buying the first home that their family has ever owned. And I mean, since they were brought here against their will generations ago. And that is something that stops us in our tracks every day. I mentioned that we have one alum who is the CTO at Seattle Against Slavery. We have 2 other alums who have now risen to CTO, Chief Technology Officer level roles. And that's where we really see that flywheel start to move on its own and know that it's going to live on way, way beyond any of us, because they're not only hiring differently, but they're setting the policies and practices of these globally impactful organizations. And so that's where I really start to see and find a great deal of hope in that multiplier effect of investing in women, and particularly in their economic power.
Fantastic. Unbelievably, I'm sort of, unfortunately, one of my jobs is to watch the clock. We are almost at time for this webinar. So I'm going to pull some questions that came in through the Q&A. One is lots of questions about how folks can learn more about your work, learn more about the rubric, learn how to apply it. People are asking, is it only evaluated qualitatively or also quantitatively? How do you think about the role of philanthropic organizations, scaling, et cetera? So I want to let everybody know that there will be an email that you will get from the Center for High Impact Philanthropy that will include a downloadable guide, a worksheet that you can use. To answer the question qualitatively or quantitatively, my answer is yes, both. That is because of exactly the kinds of nuance that Sonia just talked about. I think it's very tempting, particularly in the world we've been living in, to want one simple thing, but that's not the experience of what you've heard, and that's not the world. And so we tried to resist that, but hopefully in a way that is still very practical and useful. And that email you get will also include a recording of this discussion. So for any of you who have colleagues who couldn't make it, they get a second chance at hearing this. Before we sign off, maybe just one word from each of our panelists, and then I will pass it back to Kelly to close us out. You can imagine, as a center called the Center for High Impact Philanthropy, we care deeply about what your experience has been listening to this conversation. So there is literally a 1-question survey that we will ask you. But if I can just go around the Zoom room and maybe just one word or phrase that you want to leave our audience members with, and I'll start with Lauren.
And I'm going to steal mine from Thomas Friedman. I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and he was the headline speaker, and he was talking about the need for more complex adaptive coalitions. And that's what I just heard over and over again on this call. And I think wherever we can find and collectively invest in those complex adaptive coalitions, we're going to start to solve these really intractable problems that we all face.
Complex, adaptable coalitions. Excellent. Sonia, one word or phrase?
Yeah, I think for me, it's so important to talk about starting from within. And as we're thinking about doing this work, we actually, probably everybody on this call is an employer and therefore working with survivors. And what is the way in which within our own organizations, we can be doing our part? What is the way in which we can be investing in a sustainable movement, making sure that the people that are doing this work day in, day out have a salary and a wage that they can actually stay safe on themselves, and really understanding that the work that we do externally really doesn't get us anywhere if we're not beginning internally.
Start from within. Maanda, a word or phrase that you want to leave people with?
I believe in solidarity women movement for creating long and lasting change that affect individuals and collective community rights.
Excellent. Solidarity. And Angie, you get the last word on this one. A word or phrase.
Oh, a word or phrase is complex. You're asking somebody who comes from a background of storytelling to say a word or phrase. So I'll borrow Nick Christoph's word, perpetual motion machine. That I think whatever we are doing, so it's perpetual motion machine. In whatever we are doing, in whatever way, with all that we know, all that we have, can we always think about perpetual motion machine? How do we make this outlive us? How do we make this, sustained into posterity? Let's not just think now, let's think for future generations to come. So that's my phrase, perpetual motion machine. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for sharing your work and experience with us. Kelly, do you want to bring us home? So you'll see that is where you can access more information about these and other organizations, as well as the guidebook, a downloadable worksheet, and lots of resources if what you care about is to dismantle structural inequality. And hopefully soon, if you haven't already, you will see our 1-question survey just to let our team know whether or not this was valuable to you.